And the basic idea about it is to work very hard for human rights in Palestine, which is really important. But it struck us, I've been involved in it since the beginning, and it struck us that it was sometimes quite hard to talk about what was happening there because people heard it as an issue or something political, something outside themselves, something very difficult, and they just switched off. And it was too important, and it is too important to let people just switch off. And so we were very interested in ways that we could help people to see that this is immediate, that it's about human beings who are just human beings like the people who are listening. And so actually people's personal stories have become very, very important. The situation is actually very, very bad. One of the things that we find when we take people there from here is two things happen at once, and it's always the case. People like the people, they like the sunshine, they like the food. There are all sorts of nice things that they find. But going through and behind and round absolutely everything is the fact of being under Israeli occupation. And I think probably every place in Palestine has a slightly different experience of that. But Abu Dis is in the Jerusalem suburb, and it is massively badly affected by the Israeli separation wall, which cuts through the edge of the town and divides Abu Dis from Jerusalem, which has in the past been the main centre of people's lives. People have been born there, they've worked there, their social things are there. That's no longer true of the kids because they're growing up next to this huge concrete barrier. South of the town there's one of the major military checkpoints, and it's just appalling. You know, we've had this relation for only 11 years or all of 11 years or whatever. And the first time somebody was really hurt at the checkpoint was just incredibly shocking. But actually over that time there are so many awful things that have happened because of the military violence. Abu Dis has, I think, 2 military camps in the town. It has massive settlements to the east of it, which have taken a lot of its land. It's threatened with more land being taken away now for a huge settlement development known as the E1 project, which is particularly contentious because it would split the West Bank in 2. It's everybody, everything is affected by being under military occupation. I mean, basically, and I was talking about the sort of 2 things that people realise. You know, going there, really, what people are dying to do is to live a normal life and be concerned with their kids' education and people getting married and having a good time and so on. But underlyingly, there's always something. There'll be somebody who's been imprisoned or has just come out of prison, had their education messed up. There'll be, you know, the sister that people can't see because she's the other side of the wall, or the brother who can't come back because, you know, had left in 1967 and is in Jordan and can't come back, or you know, somebody or other who's been wounded in one way, and everybody who's massively hurt by it. I mean, the more it's a very strange thing actually going from here. Sometimes people are quite frightened to go because they think it's a war and they know about the violence. I don't quite know how it compares to other places, but it's not a glaring war in the West Bank most of the time, like it was, for example, in Gaza last summer. But there's violence, the possibility of violence, things that stop people travelling. It is an occupation. It's absolutely every facet of life, from birth, which can be really messed up by it. Abu Dis has hospitals on the other side of the wall, and people can't easily get to those hospitals. People who are about to have babies worry about whether they'll get to the hospital on time. So from birth to death, you know, people have told us again and again of horrible stories of people's funerals where, you know, one group of people are given one sort of identity card by Israel and another lot of people are given another. And if, say, a husband and wife have different ID cards. There are sometimes situations where the wife can't get to her husband's funeral. Things that sound like stories, but they're very, very real and horrible. I don't know as many, of course, as people who come from there, but during the time that we've been working there, there have been people who've been shot by the army for trying to go over the wall to work because they haven't been allowed. It's very hard to get work. There is work on the other side and they haven't been allowed to go through the checkpoints. So, you know, there are steadily people trying to climb that horrible thing and being punished for it. One of the worst, which actually wasn't by Abu Dis, was next to a flying checkpoint near a village near Nablus. And a flying checkpoint just means that soldiers blocked the road, held everybody up. I was in a very, very hot car in the sun for 3 or 4 hours. Great long, long line of people. Some people turned round and went back, and people who had to keep going stayed. Eventually I got out of the car and I remember looking, and there was a soldier not very far away at all. I remember looking at him. He looked crazy, to be honest. And he shot past me, not at me, but past me, and it must have broken on the hill that I was standing on. And you know, I don't know if it connected to me or the person behind, or there were loads of people around, but he shot. It went past my leg, split, it went into somebody's foot who had to be taken to hospital, and it went into the back of a kid who had just been into Nablus with his mum to get his books for the new school year. I didn't meet Adam before I heard of him. We were told by our friends in Abu Dis that Adam and his cousin Johar were both footballers, I think, in the Palestinian football team, and that they'd been playing football in Aram, which is outside Abu Dis. They'd come back to change at the Abu Dis Sports Club, which is nothing very big. In fact, it's a very tiny place that uses the school playing fields. It's not even playing fields, a schoolyard for football. That's what people have in Abu Dis. So they'd been there and they'd come out, they'd been on their way home. And on their way home, they'd been shot and dogs had been set on them. So they'd been mauled and shot and badly injured. We heard about all of this and started to ask and fuss and write letters and so on. Then I understand that they were taken to hospital and their parents weren't allowed to see them. When I think, was it Adam or his cousin? I think it's Adam, whose mother is from Ukraine. She was told that she should stop fussing about being able to see her son, or she wouldn't be able to stay there anymore. And the whole thing was horribly, just cruel and horrible and worrying. But the story went on longer because they were actually taken. After a little while, they were let out of that hospital. They weren't properly treated, and they were taken to Jordan, where they were 3 months in hospital. And people found money for them to have really good treatment, and they started to get better. But then on the way back into the West Bank, suddenly they were arrested. That was appalling anyway. You know, we saw pictures of them. I hadn't met Adam. But we saw pictures of them, you know, limping, getting better, but able to use crutches and move around. And we felt really hopeful about it. And we heard from the families that they'd been told, we just want to talk to them on their own. No, don't worry. So they'd separated them from their families, but then they took them away and arrested them. And we started to get involved in a campaign for them because there was no story that made any sense at all. If they'd been shot on their way home from football, doing nothing, and they'd been arrested and released, because presumably they'd done absolutely nothing, then to wait until they came back after 3 months, when they'd been in hospital, everyone knew they'd been in hospital, I mean, there's nothing more they could have done. The whole thing was absolutely crazy. So we wrote, and a lot of people around here had been involved in sending them get well cards and things like that. So there were just a lot of letters, and there was a lot of a campaign. And there was no way of the Israelis doing what we know they often do, which is say, we'll investigate. It was just so obviously false. And they were released after a little while. So they were very important to us. We had a birthday party for Adam while he was actually in prison. He turned 18 when he was in prison. And so we had a party, and one of the people in Cadfa made a cake with bars on. And we promised that when they were released, we would have another cake. So we did. We had a party when they were released, and this one had candles. And then we had a youth visit in September. And Adam still just about fitted the criteria. He was at school in Abu Dis, trying to take his Tawjihi, which is like his A-levels. He'd missed a year, but he was back again. He must just about be taking them now. So we thought we'd invite him over with the youth visit, which was great because he's lovely. And I think that is one of the other ways that the story got out, isn't it? Yeah, no, I feel this is a really important current issue. It's the knot in the middle of all sorts of other horrible things that are happening. And as a human being, I feel really passionately about it. It's absolutely appalling to see people being treated in this way. And there's a particular level of hypocrisy which is particularly stinging because things in that part of the world are told backwards. We've been told lies. I'm certain I was brought up on lies about what was happening there. Not always because, you know, my parents and the people around me knew that they were lies. And maybe that's one of the things that moves me personally. It seems really important that people should be able to look through and see what we're actually talking about, human beings like us having experiences that they shouldn't have to have. I'd like the people who watch the play to understand that Adam is just an ordinary person, probably a very good footballer, but an ordinary person like them, and that it is completely outrageous that somebody should go to play football and go home and in that space of time be shot, mauled by dogs, and blamed for all sorts of things that he didn't do, and to go beyond that and actually realise that unfortunately it's not just Adam. Sorry, can I say something else, which in a way you might want somewhere else? You're asking about Adam, who I didn't know till he came here. But what he kept saying, we were very worried about him. We were wondering whether somehow or other we were making him sort of relive some sort of trauma and we shouldn't be dwelling on what happened to him. And he kept saying, this isn't my story, it's the story of Palestinians. Yes, it was painful, but it's not my story, it's everybody's story and people should hear it. So I think what I really hope is that this play is going to make people listen to Adam's story and realise that it's not just Adam's story, it's the story of all Palestinians, it's the story of outrageous human rights abuse, and all of us should have a role in stopping that.